What is up, guys, and welcome into the Wide Right Football Podcast Studio. I am Kieran Drover, and today I'm kicking off my very first episode about my favorite team, the Buffalo Bills. To be honest, I'm not sure whether or not this will be an all Bills podcast because that's what I look at every day in my life, or more general football, which I look at every day as well. But it's easy for me right now to make this first episode about the Bills, granted the heartbreak that we saw on Sunday night. 4 of the past 5 seasons, the Bills have lost in the playoffs to Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and the Kansas City Chiefs. Right now, if you go on Twitter, there's a million different opinions as to whether it was the refs that screwed them, on the 4th and 5. Was it Allen's fault? Was it the center's fault for not calling out the right protection? Yada, yada, yada. Should they fire Sean McDermott, et cetera, et cetera. For me, it really just came down to not making enough plays. Again, you can blame the refs. You can say that there's a difference in coaching between the Bills and the Chiefs, which I do believe there is, but I also believe there is anytime a team steps onto the field against Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo, and the Kansas City Chiefs. So for me, it really just came down to the Bills not making enough plays, and players make plays. I thought it was interesting. Sean McDermott in his end of season press conference yesterday said that the Bills need 2, or more generally any football team needs 2 to 3 difference makers on each side of the ball. My interpretation of that is A, the Bills don't have enough of them. On offense, Josh Allen is 100% one. I think James Cook is becoming one. And I think that Spencer Brown and Deion Dawkins at left and right tackle are difference makers. So when you look at the Bills offense, I guess you have 3, if you want to count offensive linemen. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I think maybe Christian Benford. I think Terrell Bernard is super important because of the communication he provides to the defense. He's one of the leaders, hence the reason he wears a captain's patch. But I don't think he's a great player. I don't think Greg Rousseau is a great player. Von Miller's 35 years old and he's torn his ACL twice. Ed Oliver's a good player. But I don't necessarily think that the Bills have 2 to 3 difference makers on their defense, if they even have 1. So this first episode is going to be about my personal, everyone's going to have a different opinion, top 5 priorities for the Buffalo Bills to hit on this offseason. Now, it's not going to be easy. Brandon Beane said that, the Bills aren't going to be big spenders, as is expected. They don't have a ton of cap space. They haven't for the last couple of years. They've been trying to rebuild the cap. Hence the reason we saw a ton of different trades last offseason with Diggs, the releases of Poyer and Hyde and Mitch Morse and Tre'Davious White. And so for the Bills, it's going to be, can you build through the draft? Can you find difference makers with your first and second round picks? They haven't been able to do that enough over the past few years. They've taken a ton of swings at edge, which is actually first on my priority list, whether it was Greg Rousseau, who again is, I think, a good football player. He should be re-signed, but he's not a difference maker. He's not Chris Jones. In the AFC Championship game, the first drive, the Bills, you could tell they came out a little bit shaky on offense. Allen almost intercepted twice, got lucky not to have been, but that drive was wrecked by Chris Jones. You go back and watch that tape on 2nd and 10, he destroys Osiris Torrance, the right guard. And Matt Collins is open. He's at least NFL open. He's not wide open, but he's got a step or two. That's NFL open. And Josh sails it because Chris Jones gets a hand on his arm as he's releasing the football. And then on 3rd and 10, same thing. Allen tries to step up in the pocket. Chris Jones destroys David Edwards, the left guard. Allen can't step into the throw to Curtis Samuel over the middle, the drive route. Would have been a first down catch and run, but he can't get the ball there, and so he's forced to scramble to somehow escape, and then he throws up a prayer to Keon Coleman downfield. It doesn't work out. In that game, and I got some notes here, Chris Jones on 36 pass rush snaps had a win rate of 33.3%, 8 pressures, 2 hits, 6 hurries. And like I said, go back and watch the Bills' opening drive. He wrecks it. That is a difference maker. That is a one possession, one score game where he single-handedly took a possession away from the Buffalo Bills. The Bills scored 3 points on that drive. They scored a touchdown on that drive. That's the difference. But they, the Chiefs, had a player on their defense that was able to take a drive away from the Bills, almost single-handedly. For comparative sake, Greg Rousseau, 30 pass rush snaps, a win rate of 6.9%, one total pressure. That's your best edge rusher in the biggest game of the year. And we've seen this over and over again with the Bills. They're not able to get enough pressure against Mahomes or Burrow a couple of years ago in the playoffs. Now I know that there's an element of trying to maintain your rush lanes, contain Mahomes in the pocket as opposed to maybe going right up to sack him, because we know how dangerous he can be when he gets outside of the pocket. But still, Ed Oliver, 25 pass rush snaps, a win rate of 4.5%, 2 total pressures. Now, I thought Ed Oliver was the Bills' best defensive lineman in that game. I thought he was pretty good. I thought he was probably their best defensive lineman throughout the entire playoffs. But even still, that's not good enough. I mean, compare that back to Chris Jones, 33.3%. And I'm not asking you guys to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but that is a significant difference. AJ Epinesa, second round pick in 2020, 23 pass rush snaps, a win rate of 0%. 0%. And Daquan Jones, 22 pass rush snaps, a win rate of 0%. No pressures. Von Miller, 10 pass rush snaps, a win rate of 20% with 2 total pressures. So your best pass rusher in that game was a 35-year-old with 2 torn ACLs. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. Sean McDermott preaches rushing with 4, which is great. Certain teams can do that. You saw the Houston Texans do it a lot against the Chiefs in the divisional round, and they were able to disrupt the Chief offense. Looked a heck of a lot better than the Bills defense did, but they got Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson on each edge, and those guys are monsters. The Bills do not have that. And, I mean, personally, I don't see the Bills going out and getting Myles Garrett or Max Crosby. I think it would be awesome, but the Bills, outside of the Diggs trade, have notoriously held on to their draft picks. They hold a lot of value for the Bills, which I think they should. And I don't think they have the money to take on either of those contracts. Nor do I think that those teams are willing to move those players right now unless you bring them a monstrous offer, which I just don't think the Bills are willing to do. Maybe Trey Hendrickson for Cincinnati, but do I see the Cincinnati Bengals giving their best pass rusher, a top pass rusher in the NFL, to a potential playoff rival, a competitor? No, unless the offer is great. And do the Bills want to give a first or a second or a first and 2 seconds to the Cincinnati Bengals to help them rebuild themselves and get back into the playoffs and be a worthy competitor to the Bills again? No, probably not. So the Bills are going to have to go into the draft and, like they have a lot in recent drafts, take another swing at edge. I've got them all right here. The Von Miller signing, I think the Bills kind of get a bad rap on that. Don't get me wrong. Was 6 years, $120 million, probably too much? Yes. But was it going to be very difficult to get Von Miller to come to Buffalo unless you gave him an over-the-top offer? Probably. He also tore his ACL after getting 8 sacks in his first 8 games as a Bill. Tough luck. If the Bills had gone on to win a Super Bowl that year and he was healthy and he closed out a game in the playoffs and then never played another snap, it's worth every penny. Unfortunately, he tore his ACL, and I think he's still arguably the best pass rusher on the team. Pure pass rusher. But Boogie Basham, second rounder, 2021. AJ Epinesa, second rounder, 2020. Greg Rousseau, 2021 first rounder. So they've taken swings continuously every year at edge rusher. I think they're going to have to do it again. They've got 3 picks in the first 60, I believe, because they have Minnesota's second round pick as well. Some guys I like. I really like James Pierce Jr., because you're not getting Abdul Carter. He might go first overall to the Tennessee Titans. He is in my opinion, generational pass rusher. James Pierce Jr. is from Tennessee. He is, I think, the best every down edge defender in this draft outside of Abdul Carter. I think despite being only 248 pounds, which is on the lighter side for NFL edges, I think he plays above his weight class. And I think that he is a worthy run defender and then is really good at winning the outside shoulder. He's got a super, super explosive first step. Do I think he could add some more moves to his repertoire? Yes. But I think he's a very good edge rusher who I don't think will be available at the Bills pick 30, but in Daniel Jeremiah's first mock draft, he did go to the Chiefs at 32. So would I be upset if that happened? Absolutely. Another one is Mike Green from Marshall. 17 and a half sacks, led the nation this year. I really like him. He's got a really good showing at the Senior Bowl this week. He blew up Josh Connerly, a potential first-round tackle from Oregon. So really like Mike Green. And then, bear with me saying this last name, but Princely Umanmielen from Ole Miss. He's not necessarily an every down edge rusher. I wouldn't take him in the first round, but like I said, the Bills 2 second-round picks. I think if he gets within your range towards the end of the second round and you didn't take an edge rusher with your first-round pick, that he is a pass rush specialist. I mean, go watch his tape against Georgia this year. He's got a ridiculously good spin move. Again, a very explosive first step. Wins with speed most times. I don't think he's an every down edge defender to start his career, and that's sort of what the Bills have liked to take over the years. I mean, Boogie Basham coming out of college was 6'5", 285. Greg Rousseau, 6'6", 260. AJ Epinesa, 6'6", 280. Solomon in the fifth round last year was 6'2", 246. So that was sort of a tendency breaker for Buffalo. So they like to draft more bigger edges that can play every down right away, perhaps. I don't see that from Princely from Ole Miss. Maybe not Mike Green either. I do think Pierce can be that guy despite only being 248 pounds. But those are, I think, a few of the more sort of worthy options for the Bills to potentially take in the draft. And I think that to me is the number one priority this offseason, is finding a difference maker. I think it's hard to be a difference maker or harder at safety or at off-ball linebacker. I think the Bills need to start winning the trenches on the defensive side of the ball. And to get a really good edge rusher would go a long way. My second priority would only add to this at defensive tackle. Unfortunately, Ed Oliver had, I would say, a disappointing season compared to what we saw from him last year. And Daquan Jones looked great before he tore his pec in week 5 of last season. Never really came back the same. They re-signed him to a cheap, shorter 2-year deal this offseason, so he will be in Buffalo, I would presume, next year. But is he a starting caliber tackle at 33 years old? I don't think so. The Bills' run defense was not good enough this year. And that, to me, started on the interior defensive line. And, I mean, the stats back it up. Amongst defensive linemen who played at least 50% of their team's run defense snaps, Ed Oliver ranked 65th in run stop percentage at 5.2%. And Daquan Jones ranked tied for 73rd with a run stop percentage of 3.9. For reference, the highest run stop percentage within that sample size, leading the NFL, was Calais Campbell for Miami, a 15.9 run stop percentage. So 5.2% for Ed Oliver, 3.9% for Daquan Jones, 15.9% was the best of the best. So a significant drop-off for both of the Bills' tackles. Ed Oliver is obviously going to be a Bill for the foreseeable future. He's a good, in my opinion, 3-tech defensive tackle. He's a penetrator. He has pass rush ability. I think he's better than what he did this season. I think he was one of the Bills' better defenders in the playoffs, at least certainly on the defensive front. So the first thing that might come to mind is, well, now they need a 1-tech. which is what Daquan Jones was playing. And so when you think of a one tech, you think of a 370-pound player like T'Vondre Sweat that just is there to eat blocks, take on double teams, and allow the rest of the defensive front to win their one-on-ones, whether that's against the run or against the pass. The Bills, though, sort of have taken a different approach to their one tech. They've typically been more athletic players with some penetration skills. Daquan Jones is not 6'4", 370 pounds. I don't know his exact measurements, but he's on the smaller side of things when it comes to one tech defensive tackles. So I wouldn't expect the Bills to go out and sign a player like, this is just the first guy coming to mind, T'Vondre Sweat or the Jordan Davis you see on the Eagles. Again, more of an athletic player with some penetration skills. That's sort of like Oliver, more than anything. And again, I think that there's a lot of potential options in the draft this year for those kinds of guys, whether it's Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, Derek Harmon from Oregon, two good defensive tackles. Tyleik Williams from Ohio State is more that prototypical one-tech run defender that doesn't really have much pass rush. I would expect the Bills not to go down that line just because of what history's told us, what they like in their defensive tackles at the one-tech spot. But I really like Walter Nolan if he's there at 30. And I think that there's a couple of other good options as well. So for me, defensive tackle and improving the run defense, which improved. They had that chip on their shoulder. Ed Oliver talked in the locker room after the Denver game about, wow, they thought we couldn't stop the run. We were too small, yada, yada, yada. I'll give the defense credit. They definitely improved their run defending in the playoffs, but it just wasn't great as a whole this year. And so I think that, again, winning the trenches up front, which is the most important part of a defense, needs to be improved this year for Buffalo, both on the edge and inside. 3 for me is boundary corner. Listening to the end-of-year presser yesterday for Brandon Beane, he didn't really give any sort of definitive answer as to what the direction was going to be with Rasul Douglas, and I get it because the loss is fresh from Sunday still. But Rasul didn't really have a great end of the season. He's on the wrong side of 30 now. I thought he really regressed with showing his age, especially in the back half of the year after he suffered another knee injury that held him out a couple of weeks. So I personally would not bring Rasul Douglas back. He's an unrestricted free agent, so you can just let him go for free. And I think that there needs to be an upgrade at that position. I will admit that I thought Kyer Elam could potentially be the fill-in after Rasul left this offseason, assuming that's what happens. But any hope of confidence in Kyer Elam was thrown out the window against the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, that is a man coverage corner coming out of Florida 3 years ago who just he couldn't cover anyone. And the Bills played a lot of man coverage. They don't typically do that. They played a lot of man coverage against Kansas City the other night. It was a big opportunity for Kyer Elam. I wouldn't say it was an easy spot, but it was a big opportunity for him to come in and show that he might be able to replace Rasul Douglas. I don't think that's the case. I don't know that Jamarcus Ingram is going to replace Rasul Douglas on the outside. And so therefore, if you don't bring back Rasul Douglas, you need to go out and get a new boundary corner. So where are they going to go to get that? Again, I think the draft is always the best spot to get anyone, personally. I mean, rookie contracts are extremely valuable. If you can take a player in the draft and they're impact players right away or 1 or 2 years down the line and you can get them on a rookie contract as starters, good impact starters, that's always your best route. Now, there is one player in particular that I think is interesting in this year's free agency class, and that's Charvarius Ward. That's the second team All-Pro from 2023 who had a down year for many reasons. In 2024, unfortunately, he lost his child, and he talked about how there was a level of discomfort going back to San Francisco after what had happened. a terrible, terrible tragedy, but I would expect him to test the free agent market this offseason. I think after having struggled last season, understandably so, and dealing with some injuries, that there's going to be a lucky team that's going to get him on a team-friendly deal. I think Buffalo could perhaps be that team. He's still only 28 years old, turning 29 in May, so he still has some tread left on his tires. 23 pass breakups, 5 interceptions in 2023. That was something that we didn't see from Rasul Douglas this year. You know, he had 4 interceptions and 8 pass breakups in 10 games as a Bill after being traded there from Green Bay last season, mid-season. This year, 3 pass breakups, 0 interceptions. So not only was he not great in coverage and he took some penalties, but he wasn't making any plays on the ball anymore. And this was a Bills team that relied on takeaways. There wasn't a lot of punts they were forcing. It was either the opposite team scored or the Bills took the ball away. And when you have a every down starter at corner that can't take the ball away, when your defense is relying on taking the ball away, that's a problem. So I would expect Rasul Douglas not to be back. Like I said, he really tapered off in the second half of the season. His coverage grades per Pro Football Focus from weeks 10 and on, 42.7 in week 10, 63.7 in week 11. Week 12, there was a bye, so no game. Week 13, after the bye, 44.4. Week 14, 41.6. He missed weeks 15 and 16 due to the knee injury that I was talking about. Week 17, 53.1. Week 18, 67.7, although he only played 16 snaps because the Bills rested a lot of starters against New England. Wildcard round, 53.2. There was the miscommunication on the opening drive where Bo Nix was able to hit Troy Franklin for that huge, I think, 52-yard touchdown. A miscommunication between Douglas and Rapp led to that. 53.2 that week. 38.5 in the divisional playoff round against the Ravens. 38.5. In at that time, the biggest game of the year against an MVP quarterback. Now, I know it's a tough matchup, especially in the snow. The snow makes it much harder on a corner than it does on a wide receiver. And that job's already hard enough as it is. And then in the biggest game of the year, the AFC title game, when we really needed Benford, or the Bills really needed Benford to step up, Douglas to step up with Benford exiting the game due to injury, 38.9. And again, a tough matchup at Kansas City, but that's not an excuse. You need your best players to play their best in the biggest games. And the Bills didn't have enough of that. And that's why they lost by 3 points. More stats on Douglas. Amongst defenders who played at least 50% of their team's coverage snaps in 2024, Douglas was ranked tied for 60th out of 73 players with just 3 pass breakups, and he didn't have an interception. So again, struggled to make plays on the ball. And within that same sample, his 116.9 passer rating allowed this season, regular season and playoffs included, was the 7th worst out of 73 qualifying players. I thought Rasul Douglas was awesome last year. He's had a great career, a great story. He's an undrafted guy that was on practice squads. He fought his way into a starting lineup. Great career. But I don't think it continues in Buffalo, and I don't think it should, unfortunately. On to the next one. A field-stretching wide receiver. Look, I've never been someone personally that's been enamored with, other than Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones, but those guys are anomalies. Some of the best football players, not just receivers of all time. With the idea of getting a player that's great because he's big and he's able to win contested catches, yada, yada, yada. For me, I want a separator. Can you win? Can you find open space? Can you get open? Because we got the quarterback that'll find you, but can you get open? And Keon Coleman, I didn't love coming out of the draft because unfortunately he didn't really ever separate. Incredible athlete. Guy played basketball at Michigan State and receiver before transferring to FSU. Made some of the craziest catches you will ever see. Heck, he had one for the Bills against Tariq Woolen in Seattle this year. Awesome. Awesome. And he had flashes before injuring his wrist against Miami in week 9. And after that, I mean, the Bills told you yesterday, both McDermott and Bean in their post-conference or post-season pressers, that it wasn't the same after that. But he's just not a natural enough separator. And that was your big swing in the offseason to replace Diggs, so to speak. And I mean, I think there's a lot left to be written about Keon Coleman, but I certainly didn't love his rookie year. Again, encouraging signs up until week 9, but after that, not much for the whole rest of the season. And the Bills tried to add with Amari Cooper. They knew they needed to find a way to win on one-on-one outside. And whether it was a combination of Amari Cooper getting old or the Bills' philosophy of being efficient this year on offense, which worked, they just weren't able to do that. According to PFF, Keon Coleman had the lowest separation percentage amongst receivers with at least 100 opportunities at just 34.06%. The next lowest was in the 40s. This includes all routes run where a defense tried to prevent a receiver from getting open. Josh Allen's numbers when targeting Keon Coleman, 20-plus yards down the field. 6 for 22, 27.3% completion percentage. 176 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. That is a 56.6 passer rating. Josh Allen, when targeting anyone down the field this year, 33 for 87, so just 37.9%, 1,055 yards, 5 touchdowns, 2 picks. Now, I know that wasn't the Bills' philosophy, but I do think that they do need to find a way to put more stress on the second and third level of a team's defense, particularly the third level. Now, I don't think this was all on Keon, and now I feel sort of bad because this has become just kind of a Keon hit piece section. I think Keon has a lot of potential, and I don't think that it was drafting Keon Coleman specifically that led to the Bills having problems with throwing the ball downfield. Do I think a lack of field stretching receivers led to this? Yes. But I also thought that Josh, I know a lot of people struggle to give Josh criticism. I love Josh. I'll defend him till I'm blue in the face, but he was inaccurate at times throwing downfield. I mean, there were times where he had guys open downfield and he wasn't able to hit them. So I think that's a definite key area of improvement for the Bills heading into this offseason, is finding a receiver, and I don't think that's going to be Cooper. I would personally let Cooper walk. I thought it was a great experiment. I thought he was a great leader in the locker room. Not that I'm in there. But I think it's time to move on and find a more dynamic downfield, field stretching receiver. Hopefully that can be Keon. That'd be awesome. I just personally don't foresee that being the case. I think Keon is a great athlete. I think he's the kind of player that will make 1 or 2 highlight reel catches a game in his prime, potentially. But I don't ever see him being someone that you can funnel 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 targets to in a game when need be. And I know that doing that with Diggs was sort of a downfall at times in the past. But I do think the Bills do need to improve at wide receiver. I don't think it needs to be some drastic drafting of a Jamar Chase. I don't think that they're, not going to be any better if they don't get a player like that. We saw that Josh Allen can do more with less. But I do think they do need to find an element of being able to stretch defenses down the field and kind of add that element back to their offense, and be a little bit more dynamic that way. On to the last of my 5 priorities for the Bills this offseason is safety. Taylor Rapp and DeMar Hamlin weren't bad this year. I don't think they were bad at all. In fact, I think that they were exactly what the word and definition of safety is. Safety. Now, there were a few times where they would allow some deep balls, whether it was a miscommunication or they didn't read the field right or they weren't deep enough. But for the most part, I thought they were great safety valves. Now, they weren't difference makers by any means. Um, but I thought they were pretty good this year. With that said, I do think that they need to improve at the safety position. I love Damar Hamlin. He's had a great story, but I don't think that he's an everyday starter, personally, at least not on a title contender. I would expect Rapp to be one of the starting safeties next year. They signed him to a 3-year, $14 million contract last offseason. Look, that's not breaking the bank, but it's a pretty significant investment in a player, in a person. And then there's Cole Bishop. And I like Cole Bishop. I think that with confidence, he can be a starter, an NFL starting safety. If you go back and watch his tape at Utah, I thought he had a nose for the ball. And I don't mean that in the sense that he's going to intercept 6 passes a season or force 8 fumbles, but he does find ways to get to the ball. And I think he's a good tackler. I think he can play in the box. I think he can play deep. But with that said, I think his skill set is more similar to Rapp's than it is to Hamlin's. And so if you're going to lose Hamlin, I think it's great to have Bishop and Rapp play together. But I do think they do need to add a safety. And again, I thought there was a missing element that the Bills had in the past with Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer of having their safeties have an ability to make plays on the ball. Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde were incredible at that. They got a ton of interceptions. They were always around the ball. And I think Cole Bishop has the ability to do that, but I do think that there is a potential need to upgrade at safety, assuming that Damar Hamlin doesn't return, unless he's okay with not being a starter next season. So we'll see. I think that regardless of who plays at safety, Sean McDermott needs to be given credit for having a great track record at developing safeties, whether that was here in Buffalo or his time in Carolina. He does find ways to get the most out of his safeties. And look, I mean, look no further than what Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde showed up to Buffalo as. I mean, Micah Hyde was a starter. He was a good starter. He wasn't a great starter in Green Bay. He became an all-pro in Buffalo. Jordan Poyer was barely a starter. He had started some games, but he was on practice squads a little bit here and there. He was a late-round pick. He was by no means a superstar, and he became a difference maker for the Bills. He became an all-pro for next to nothing when they first signed him. So, again, I do have confidence that McDermott is going to be able to always have pretty good safeties. This year, I thought the safeties were pretty good. I don't think they were great, but I don't think they were terrible. And I think Cole Bishop has a potentially bright future. I just think he needs to add confidence. I thought he was a little timid at times this season. He did get beat when he did play that game in Houston. Of course, as a rookie coming into that title game, that was a really tough spot. But I do think that he is a good football player and has a potentially bright future in Buffalo. Now, there is one player in particular in the draft that has been sort of my, I'll call, first draft crush since this, I guess, season has ended, but even long before that when I was watching college football throughout the season and studying some tape on future draft picks for this year, and that's Xavier Watts, who is a safety from Notre Dame. He is the definition of making plays on the ball. He's awesome. He's an older guy. He's played a lot of years in college football. I think in 2023 he won Defensive Back of the Year. He won some award I'd have to look up. But he just has a knack for taking the ball away, and he's a lot of fun to watch. And I think that there is potential to maybe draft him in the second round. I don't know that he goes in the first, but he's a very fun player. Someone that I personally would love to see as a Buffalo Bill. So we'll see what the Bills decide to do this offseason. Again, I think that Sean McDermott hit the nail on the head when he said that the Bills don't. He didn't say they don't have enough, but I think he was sort of implying that by saying it. The Bills don't have enough difference makers. Josh Allen is one on offense. The offensive line as a unit, especially Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown, are one. James Cook, I think, is becoming one. So the offense scored a ton of points this year. I mean, if you look at every metric, whether it's points scored, yards, EPA, per pass, per run, they're top 2, 3 in each of those categories, 1 in some cases. But on defense, not the same. In fact, I don't know that there's even one. I think the one closest to it would be Christian Benford. I'd expect him to see a contract extension sooner rather than later. I'm hoping that'll come this offseason. And getting him and Cook and numerous other players re-signed, I think is a part of this priorities list for sure. Might even be first or second or third. But the Bills need to find a way to add difference makers. So we'll see what they can do this offseason. Again, a disappointing end to year one. I hope you guys enjoyed this first podcast. I tried to do it all in one take and make it as authentic as possible. Yes, I use notes to have some sort of proof to back up what I'm spewing into this mic. Again, still not super decided on whether or not this is going to be a pure Bills podcast or a more general football podcast. Like I said, it's very easy for me to sit here and talk about the Bills for 40 minutes because I obsess over looking at every little thing they do every single day. But with that said, I watch a lot of football in general as well, and see a lot of things that other teams are doing. So maybe it's mostly Bills with some sprinkles of some other teams in here, or general news that's going on in the NFL, or just my opinion on things that are going on in the NFL. Maybe this is the only time I wear this hat and I go Rob Lowe mode and put on an NFL hat. Or maybe it's just the Bills. We'll see. I will keep what very limited fans I assume I have at this point updated as best I can. Best thing to do is to follow the Wide Right podcast Twitter profile. I'll put a link in the description to that. And hope to see you guys again soon. Thanks for tuning in, and cheers. And as hard as it is to say right now, I guess, go Bills, go.